You're tuned in to the English Up Podcast.
Brought to you by the Speak English with Us.
Quick question. How many tabs are open right now, and how many of them are actually moving your day forward?
If your answer is too many, you're in the right place. And yes, I've been that person with Slack, email, and 3 meetings all shouting at once.
This is a B1 level episode, perfect for intermediate learners. Beginners, you're welcome too. And today's problem is very real. You're busy, but the work barely moves.
And that's the weird part. You can reply fast, join every call, and still end the day thinking, what did I actually finish?
Exactly. That drifting feeling usually isn't laziness. It's what happens when your priorities, your messages, and your feedback aren't lined up.
I once spent a whole morning polishing a doc nobody had clearly asked for. Very productive looking, very useless.
Ouch. And that's the kind of remote work fog we're talking about today. You feel active, but your energy keeps leaking into tiny tasks, follow-up messages, and back-and-forth threads that never seem to end.
And the scary part is that one unfinished thing can stay in your head all day. That's called the Zeigarnik effect, and it means unfinished tasks keep grabbing your attention.
So your brain keeps poking you like, don't forget that file. Don't forget that message. Don't forget that meeting note.
Exactly, and then decision fatigue shows up too. After too many small choices, your brain gets tired and everything starts feeling harder than it should.
So if you've been staring at a screen, switching between apps, and somehow ending up with a bigger to-do list, you're not alone.
And maybe you're also wondering why every simple answer turns into another round of back and forth. Another message, another clarification, another just checking.
That part feels exhausting because it is exhausting, and it can make even smart people feel strangely stuck.
But here's the good news. This isn't about working harder. It's about getting your alignment back, one small move at a time.
Stay until the end for our Word Tour 5 expressions that will help you talk about this clearly and naturally.
And quick challenge. Are you more of a reply immediately person or a leave it unread and panic later person?
Be honest. We can handle the truth, and later we'll give you one tiny trick to reset the whole day. But first, let's unpack why this drift happens. Last Tuesday, I opened my laptop with one clear plan, and within 10 minutes I was in Slack, then email, then a calendar invite, then a doc with no real goal.
That's the drift pattern. Your attention gets pulled by whatever is loudest, not whatever matters most, and that usually kills alignment before the day even starts.
So alignment isn't just we all kind of know the goal, right? It's that actual agreement on direction so people aren't building 3 different versions of the same thing.
Exactly. Without alignment, one person thinks the priority is speed, another thinks it's polish, and a third thinks the point is to keep everyone happy. That's how a simple project becomes a fog machine.
A fog machine is painfully accurate. I've been in those meetings where everyone sounds busy, but nobody can say what success looks like.
I once got a file back with 6 comments, 3 questions, and 0 clear outcome. So I made edits for an hour, only to learn the target had changed.
That's the exhausting part. You're not working on the work. You're working around the work. And the more unclear it is, the more back and forth you get.
Right, and back and forth feels harmless at first, but it steals momentum. One message becomes 5, 5 becomes a thread, and the thread becomes a tiny maze.
This is where ownership matters too. Because if nobody feels responsible for a task or result, everybody stays polite and nothing really lands.
Yes, and people often confuse I can help with I own this. Helping is nice. Ownership means someone is actually carrying the result.
The difference is huge. One person is holding the umbrella, the other person is asking if it might rain.
Let's make it practical. Imagine your team is editing a client proposal. Instead of saying, let's all look at it. Try this. Emma owns the intro. I own the pricing page, and the deadline is Thursday at 3.
That's clean, and it gives everyone a shape. No guessing, no invisible labor, no drifting off into random side notes.
And then comes the tiny habit that changes everything. A checkpoint. It's just a quick point to check progress or details before the work slides off track.
So a checkpoint can be as small as what's done, what's blocked, and what's next.
Yes, and if you use it early, you catch confusion before it turns into a full week of silence and surprise.
I've also noticed that unfinished tasks keep nagging at you all day, even when they're small.
That's the Zeigarnik effect again. The brain hates loose ends, so it keeps returning to them. And then decision fatigue piles on, because every tiny clarification is another decision.
So even a simple message like, "Can you tweak this?" can create pressure if nobody says what good looks like.
Exactly. And suddenly you're rereading the same sentence 4 times like it's a legal contract.
Let's do a quick practice. If a teammate asks for a small update, you can reply with 3 parts: what's changing, who's responsible, and when it's due.
That's the pattern. And it cuts down confusion fast. Instead of endless guessing, you create a tiny roadmap.
And your brain finally gets to stop doing unpaid detective work.
By the way, there's a phrase for all this repeated message, ping pong. It's called back and forth, and we'll break it down later in our word tour.
So the story so far is simple. Unclear goals create drift. Drifting creates more messages, and more messages create even less progress.
And that's why this episode matters. Because you don't need a perfect system, you need a clearer next step.
Next, we'll show you how to reset the day without overthinking it. And that part is surprisingly small. So if the problem is drift, the fix starts before the messages do. You don't need a bigger system. You need a clearer start.
I know the instinct is to open everything at once, but that's exactly how the day gets scattered. One Slack ping, one email, one calendar alert, and suddenly your brain is split into 10 pieces.
Right, and that's where a 3-minute priority reset helps. You write 1 result, 2 coordination moves, and 3 questions that need answers.
But isn't that a bit too simple? Real work isn't neat. People change scope, clients reply late, and ownership shifts halfway through the day.
That's fair, but simple doesn't mean shallow. The point is to create alignment first. If you don't know the direction, every busy task feels urgent.
Okay, but in a real team, alignment can sound nice and still fall apart fast. Someone says, "I'll handle it." Then nothing happens, and everyone assumes somebody else has ownership.
Exactly, and that silence is expensive, because then you get back and forth for hours. One person asks for clarity, another person gives a partial answer, and the thread keeps growing.
I've seen a chat thread turn into a small novel, with 7 people, 12 replies, and 0 actual progress.
And that's where a checkpoint matters. A checkpoint is just a quick moment to check progress or details, not a meeting that eats the afternoon.
But if we add a checkpoint after every conversation, won't that slow everything down?
Not if it's short. Think of it like this. After a call, you send 1 line, next step, owner, deadline. That's it.
So you're saying the goal isn't more discussion, it's less ambiguity.
Yes, because ambiguity is what creates the hidden cost. People keep replying, revising, and rechecking, and then the real work gets pushed aside.
I can see that, but a lot of people still believe they need to stay constantly available to prove they're doing their job.
And that's part of the trap. Remote work can make visibility feel like value, so people answer quickly, jump in often, and still miss the one thing that mattered most.
Guilty, I once answered 6 messages to avoid starting one hard task. That felt productive for about 9 minutes.
That is painfully relatable. And it brings us to follow through. If you don't finish the promise, the team has to carry the mental load of remembering, checking, and asking again.
Which is why ownership has to be clear from the start. If the task has no owner, it has no real home, and then it floats around the system like a lost suitcase.
A very polite lost suitcase, but yes, still lost.
Let me push back one more time. Sometimes follow-through gets blocked by things you can't control. Waiting on legal, waiting on design, waiting on a client.
Totally. And that's why the checkpoint is useful. It doesn't pretend every delay is your fault. It just makes the delay visible, so the task doesn't disappear into the dark.
Still, a checkpoint is not a judgment. It's a signal.
Exactly. A signal that says we're still connected and we know what happens next.
Okay, but what about the person who says, I don't have time for a priority reset?
Then I'd say they already don't have time. They're just spending it in the wrong place. 3 minutes at the start can save 30 minutes of confusion later.
That's the brutal math of it. And honestly, the more choices you face, the more decision fatigue takes over. So the reset isn't extra work, it's protection.
Right, because decision fatigue doesn't always look dramatic. Sometimes it looks like rereading the same message 5 times, or writing a reply, deleting it, and starting again.
Or opening a document and feeling weirdly blank, even though you've been working for 2 hours.
And that blank feeling can make people think they're failing when really they're just overloaded.
So here's the practical test. Before you start the day, say out loud 1 result, 2 coordination moves, 3 questions. Then after each important message, do the checkpoint, next step, owner, deadline.
And if the answer is messy, don't chase perfection immediately. Use the checkpoint to keep the work moving.
Right. Because progress doesn't come from endless back and forth. It comes from alignment, ownership, follow through, and a few clean checkpoints.
And yes, that sounds boringly efficient. But boring beats chaotic when your inbox is on fire.
Absolutely. Boring can be a superpower.
And if you want, you can test this tomorrow with just 1 project. No grand productivity makeover, just 1 reset and 1 checkpoint.
Start small, watch what changes, and notice how much mental noise drops when everybody knows the next move.
And by the way, there are 5 phrases for this. We will break them down later because they're the exact words you can use when your day feels busy, but nothing's moving.
If that sounds like your week, stay with us. We're not done yet.
And now, it's time for our word tour.
We've got 5 powerful expressions today, and they're the exact words we used in our story.
These aren't random vocabulary. They're the phrases that help you talk about remote work drift clearly and naturally.
If you've ever felt stuck in endless messages or unclear tasks, these words will give you the language to fix it.
Let's break them down, one by one. So, when we said the day felt busy but stuck, the first word that came up was alignment, and that's really about agreement on goals or direction.
Right? If the team isn't aligned, everyone can be working hard and still pull in different directions.
Picture a project where marketing wants one thing, design wants another, and the deadline is already breathing down your neck. That's a classic alignment problem.
And it looks productive for about 5 minutes. Then the whole thing starts wobbling.
You can even hear it in a short line like, "We're aligned on the launch date." That means the direction is clear.
Or, we need better alignment before we move. Very simple, but it stops the team from guessing.
And in remote work, that word matters because guessing is expensive. It creates extra messages, extra edits, and extra stress.
Which brings us naturally to ownership. Responsibility for a task or result.
Ownership is the difference between someone should do it and I'm doing it.
Exactly. If nobody owns the task just floats around like a lost delivery.
A very annoying lost delivery. Because then everybody is checking, but nobody is acting.
You might say, who has ownership of this draft? That asks the real question without sounding dramatic.
And if you want a cleaner version in a team chat, you can say, do we know the owner yet? Short, direct, and clear.
That phrase saves people from pretending the task is handled when it's actually just been mentioned.
I've seen that happen so many times. The message sounds active, but the result never appears.
Guilty as charged. I once thought someone will pick it up was a plan. It was not a plan.
Now, checkpoint is one of those words that sounds small, but it does real work. It's a quick point to check progress or details.
Not a giant meeting. Just a small pause to make sure the work is still on track.
You could say, let's do a quick checkpoint after the call. That means a fast check, not a long discussion.
Or, we'll hit a checkpoint tomorrow morning. Very normal, very useful.
Checkpoints are great because they stop tiny confusion from turning into giant confusion.
Exactly. Without a checkpoint, people keep moving but not always in the same direction.
And that leads straight into follow-through. To finish what you started or promised.
This one is huge. If you say you'll send the file, then send the file. That's follow through.
Revolutionary concept, right?
Apparently, yes.
A simple sentence like, thanks for following through can matter a lot, because it shows the person finished the job, not just started it.
And if you need to use it in a team setting, you might say, can we follow through on this by Friday? Clear, calm, and specific.
That phrase also reduces the mental load on everyone else, because they don't have to keep checking whether the promise is still alive.
Which is exactly why the last phrase matters so much, back and forth.
Ah, yes. The endless loop of repeated communication about the same thing.
It's the thread that never dies. One question, one answer, one clarification, then another clarification.
And suddenly half your day is gone.
You could say, we had a lot of back and forth on the budget. That means repeated communication, usually more than you wanted.
Or, let's reduce the back and forth. Beautiful sentence, honestly.
And that's the real win here. Fewer loops, clearer direction, stronger ownership, better checkpoints, and real follow-through.
In other words, the work feels lighter when the language gets cleaner.
Exactly. And that's why these 5 phrases aren't just vocabulary. They're tools for making remote work feel less slippery.
Try them once today. In a message, in a meeting, or even in your own notes.
And if one of them feels natural, keep it. If it feels awkward, use it again tomorrow. That is how it starts to stick.
Small language changes can change the whole rhythm of a team. So that was the full loop today. Busy days can hide real progress gaps, and the fix isn't magic. It's clearer direction, cleaner check-ins, and better language.
Right. If you only remember one thing, remember this. A 3-minute priority reset can pull your attention back to what actually matters.
And then the communication checkpoint keeps the work from drifting. A quick next step, owner, deadline can save a lot of confusion later.
Still love the simplicity of that. It's not fancy, but it's practical. And practical wins on messy days.
My honest takeaway is that a lot of people blame themselves when the real problem is scattered coordination. That feels heavy, but it's also relieving.
I've definitely had days where I answered messages like a very fast robot and still finished with almost nothing useful. Not my proudest era.
We've all been there. The inbox looks heroic, but the project hasn't moved.
Exactly. That's why the language we use today matters. Alignment, ownership, checkpoint, follow through, and back and forth aren't just vocabulary. They're a map.
Here's the simple action plan for tomorrow. Before you open your messages, write 1 result, 2 coordination moves, and 3 questions.
Then after one important conversation, send a tiny checkpoint note, just enough to confirm the next step.
And if something is unclear, don't let it stretch into endless back and forth. Ask once, confirm once, then move.
That's the whole game. Less guessing, more finishing.
If you tried this for just one day, you may notice something surprising. Your brain gets quieter when the work gets clearer.
And that quiet feels good. It gives you room to actually follow through instead of just spinning.
We like that version of you much better.
Same here.
Before you go, we want to hear from you. Tell us in the comments, which part of remote work feels most confusing for you right now?
We read every single comment. Thanks for listening, and try the reset tomorrow. Your future self will thank you.
And next time, we'll keep building on this kind of real-life English.
Until then, take care and keep the work moving.